Have you ever heard of a teenager who lived a real-life Grand Theft Auto, stealing houses, cars, boats, and even airplanes? This is not a Hollywood screenplay, but the unbelievable yet true life story of Colton Harris Moore. He was not your average teenager. Instead, he was living a life straight out of a video game with the law hot on his heels. Born into an unstable home, Colton's life was far from ideal. His mother, a neglectful alcoholic, was often too immersed in her own problems to care for her young son. His father, a drug addict, was absent from his life, having left Colton and his mother to fend for themselves. This lack of parental guidance and care left a void in Colton's life that he soon began to fill with crime. As early as 14, Colton began robbing houses, not for the thrill of it, but for survival. You see, Colton lived in Washington State, on an island called Camino, where there were plenty of empty summer vacation homes. He would break into these houses not just to find something to eat, but also to find a place to sleep for the night. His mother, engrossed in her own world of alcohol and neglect, was oblivious to her son's activities. So Colton continued his life of crime, growing bolder with each successful theft. He had found a way to survive, to live in a world that had turned its back on him. But as he grew more comfortable with this lifestyle, his crimes began to escalate. From stealing food and shelter, Colton moved on to stealing cars. He was no longer just a homeless teenager, he was becoming a serious criminal. But remember, this was just a kid who had been let down by the very people who were supposed to care for him the most. So here's Colton, a young boy neglected by his parents, stealing to survive. But this was just the beginning. And as we will soon find out, Colton Harris Moore was not one to stop at mere survival. From stealing houses, Colton's confidence grew, and so did the scale of his crimes. As a teenager, Colton Harris Moore was already living a life of crime. His initial escapades involved breaking into vacation homes, but as his boldness increased, so did the magnitude of his crimes. Colton didn't limit himself to houses. He quickly moved on to bigger, more audacious thefts. Imagine a young man, not even old enough to legally drive, yet stealing cars with an ease that would put seasoned criminals to shame. He was not just stealing any cars, but luxury vehicles, high-speed sports cars, and even trucks. With each successful theft, Colton's confidence soared. He was not just a petty thief anymore. He was becoming a full-fledged criminal, living a life that was almost surreal, dangerously exciting, and far removed from the norms of a typical teenager. And then, there was Harley Devon's son, Colton's partner in crime. Their friendship was far from ordinary. Together they embarked on a spree of high-stakes crimes, each one more brazen than the last. Harley, much like Colton, had an audacious spirit, a hunger for thrill, and a disregard for the law. They were like two peas in a pod, fueling each other's descent into the world of crime. From stealing houses to stealing cars, Colton's criminal activities started to escalate. But he was not satisfied. He wanted more. He craved more. His audacity knew no bounds, and his next target was something no one could have anticipated. As Colton's confidence grew, so did the audacity of his crimes, but he was about to take a step that would put him in the national spotlight. The next phase in Colton's life was about to unfold, a phase that would etch his name in the annals of crime history, making him infamous beyond his wildest dreams. What would you do if houses and cars weren't enough to steal? For Colton Harris Moore, the answer was simple. He upped the ante. He started stealing boats. Not just any boats, mind you, but the best, the fastest, the most luxurious. Then he took it one step further. He started stealing airplanes. Yes, you heard that right, airplanes. This wasn't a boy playing a video game. This was real life, with real risks, and Colton was all in. He taught himself how to fly using manuals and flight simulators, then put his self-taught skills to the test. He stole not one, not two, but 5 airplanes, flying them across state lines into Canada and even as far as the Bahamas. This audacious spree didn't go unnoticed. Law enforcement was hot on his trail. The local police, the FBI, everyone was looking for this teenage miscreant who seemed to be living out a Hollywood action movie. Yet Colton was always one step ahead, evading capture time and time again. He had become a modern-day outlaw, a teenage Robin Hood with a taste for the high life. But this wasn't a game. Every stolen car, every broken-into house, every purloined plane, it all added up. Colton had become a notorious figure, his name known far and wide. People were fascinated, scared, and intrigued. Who was this boy who could steal and fly airplanes, outsmart the police, and live a life straight out of a video game? Yet for all his infamy, Colton was still just a teenager. A teenager who had chosen a path of crime, of danger, and of thrill. A teenager who had gone from stealing food to survive to stealing planes for the thrill. With his audacious thefts and his ability to evade law enforcement, Colton had become a modern-day outlaw. But every story has an end. And for Colton, that end was drawing near. But that's a tale for another time. Every outlaw's story ends with a capture, and Colton's was no exception. The law enforcement, who had been tirelessly working to apprehend this elusive teenager, finally caught up with him. After being on the run for nearly 2 years, committing burglaries and thefts across multiple states, Colton Harris Moore was finally captured in an operation that involved local police, state troopers, the FBI, and even the Coast Guard. The arrest took place in the Bahamas, where Colton had crash-landed a stolen plane. It was a dramatic end to a crime spree that had captivated the public's attention. It's not every day that a teenager becomes a notorious cross-country outlaw. The public's reaction to his capture was mixed. Some saw him as a modern-day Robin Hood, while others viewed him as a dangerous criminal. Regardless of the public opinion, the law was clear. Colton was charged with multiple counts of burglary, theft, and being in possession of stolen property. He was also accused of interstate and international transport of stolen vehicles, including cars, boats, and airplanes. The charges were serious, and Colton was looking at a hefty sentence. In December 2024, after pleading guilty to 7 counts of burglary, Colton was sentenced to 7.5 years in prison. He was also ordered to pay more than $1 million in restitution. The teenager who had once lived a life straight out of a video game was now facing the harsh reality of the justice system. But the story didn't end there. While in prison, Colton started studying. He completed his GED and enrolled in a program to learn aeronautics. You see, Colton had always been fascinated with planes, which was evident in his daring escapades. Colton Harris Moore, the teenager who lived a real-life Grand Theft Auto, was finally in custody. His story serves as a stark reminder of where neglect and desperation can lead. But it also shows us that it's never too late to turn things around, to learn from our past, and to aspire for a better future. What can we learn from Colton Harris Moore's unusual life? Well, for starters, it's a glaring reminder of the devastating impact that neglectful parenting and lack of social support can have on a child. Colton's story isn't one of a hardened career criminal, but rather a young boy who was left to fend for himself in a world that seemed to have no place for him. It's also a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Despite the many hardships he faced, Colton managed to survive, albeit through unconventional means. But it's important to remember that survival is not the same as thriving. Colton's life was one of constant stress and uncertainty, a far cry from the stability and security that every child deserves. In many ways, Colton's story has captivated us because it's a narrative that's simultaneously tragic and fascinating. He was a kid who managed to outsmart authorities for years, stealing not just houses and cars, but boats and planes too. It's the kind of tale that seems ripped straight out of a Hollywood script, but the reality is far from glamorous. The fascination with Colton's story also speaks volumes about our society's attitudes towards crime and punishment. It's easy to romanticize his escapades, to view him as a sort of modern-day Robin Hood, but this glosses over the real harm that his actions caused, both to himself and to others. The lessons from Colton's life are many. It underscores the importance of providing adequate support for children and teenagers, especially those facing difficult circumstances. It challenges our preconceptions about crime, forcing us to grapple with the complex causes and effects of criminal behavior. But perhaps most crucially, it serves as a stark reminder of the human cost of neglect and desperation. Colton Harris Moore's life is not a tale of adventure and excitement, but a cautionary tale of what happens when a child is left to navigate the world on their own. Colton Harris Moore's life is a cautionary tale of neglect and desperation, a stark reminder of the importance of nurturing and supporting our youth.